Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar titled Mayday TVA, New Analysis of TVA's Proposed Rate Scheme. My name is Amelia Shenstone, and I'm the Regional Advocacy Director for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. For those of you not familiar with SACE, we are a nonprofit organization that promotes responsible energy choices that work to address the impacts of global climate change and ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. We are a membership organization, and we would like to acknowledge our members on this call and encourage those of you who are not members to please join us today. For ways in which you can become a member and get involved, please visit our website, www.cleanenergy.org. Now, I'd like to take a moment to review the basic functions of the Zoom platform on the bottom of your screen. To ensure sound quality, all attendee lines will be muted throughout this presentation. If you're having trouble hearing or seeing the slides, click the chat button and type in your problem so that we can help you troubleshoot. We have also saved time at the end of this presentation to answer questions about today's topic. To ask a question at any time, click the Q&A button along the bottom of your screen, and we will work to get as many questions answered as we can at the end. Lastly, we are recording this webinar, and we will send you the recording along with key action steps we address during the webinar after the webinar is finished. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our Executive Director, Dr. Stephen Smith, to get us started. Steve?
Thanks, Amelia, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Sound quality good?
Yep, sounds good, Steve.
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, my name is Stephen Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and thank you for joining. I just wanted to put a little bit of what is happening at the Tennessee Valley Authority in context. There are changes happening in the utility industry across this country that are quite profound. They deal with everything from technological advances in energy efficiency that are making the penetration of energy efficiency technologies much more prevalent, which is a good thing. A number of DOE, Department of Energy standards, have kicked in that are reducing overall energy demand again, which is a good thing because it's helping us squeeze more work out of each kilowatt hour, decrease the amount of environmental impacts we're dramatic way people save money. These are all very positive. Additionally, people are now able to do much more on the side of generating their own power. So we're seeing the penetration of technologies like solar and others, which again help us diversify our mix and bring clean energy onto the grid. The utility companies have to make a decision whether they're going to work with these technologies or whether they're going to work against these technologies and try to cling desperately to the past. And what we've seen over the last few years is that TVA has increasingly become more and more hostile to the changes that I just described, and they are positioning themselves to be an antiquated monopoly that is holding back technological innovation and resisting the positive changes that can actually make our grid more resilient and more robust. And this is unfortunate. And it's and the way that they're choosing to do that is primarily through sort of insidious and devious rate structure changes. We've seen over the last 5 to 6 years that TVA has undertaken a number of changes that have begun to shift more cost onto residential and small businesses, off of large industrial customers. They are looking to restructure the programs that support solar and energy efficiency, and they have effectively, I don't know if there's any better way to describe, they're effectively waging war on what are called distributed energy resources, which include both energy efficiency and where customers are doing their own generation. TVA is doing this as a desperate attempt to revenue streams that are clearly changing and trying to continue to cover bad decision making in the past and resist changes that would have them continue to do retirements on older, dirty things like coal-fired power plants. Plus, they've overbuilt in the natural gas area. So all these things lead TVA down this direction. Unfortunately, a lot of the local power companies that TVA serves have also bought into this concept of driving up fixed costs. And these fixed costs, we're seeing an explosion across the valley. And we'll talk a little bit about this on the webinar. Because if you raise the fixed costs, that means customers are going to have to pay more, regardless of how much power they use. So if they're conserving power by being energy efficient, or if they've added their own generation, fixed fees actually interfere with the economics of those decisions and do not reward customers for doing the most economically efficient thing to which they should be doing. They also dramatically hurt low income and people on fixed incomes, because fixed fees tend to reward very high energy users, which tend to be people in much larger homes, much more affluent people, whereas folks on the lower income scale or on fixed incomes tend to use less power. So this is a regressive rate change structure. These are penalizing the least of these people who are really struggling economically, and it is devastating for the economics of energy efficiency and clean renewable energy resources like solar. All trends that are in the wrong direction. On May 10th, TVA's Board of Directors, the most devious of all these changes they've done, which they're calling a grid access fee. It's a benign sounding proposal, but what it is going to do for the first time ever in the history of TVA, TVA is going to put a mandatory fixed fee on the wholesale rate that they sell to the 154 local power companies that basically service power to all the citizens across the Tennessee Valley. This will set into motion a series of things that TVA then can do by increasing that grid access fee over time and further disincentivizing energy efficiency and renewables and hurting low income and fixed income people. This will also exacerbate or accelerate a trend that we've seen where a lot of the local power companies have been dramatically raising their fixed cost over the last few years, while the details of how the wholesale fixed charge that TVA is going to put on have not been fully worked out on how it's going to appear on the retail bill. We anticipate that this will only further accelerate this explosion of retail rates, the fixed charges on retail rates. So TVA may try to, as a friend of mine in the utility industry has said, keep the waves off the shore. I think this is probably one of the most strategically wrong decisions that TVA has made in quite some time. They've alienated a lot of their customers, not only the residential customers, but even some of their wholesale customers. And this, I think, will ultimately fail over time, but it's going to inflict a very high cost in the near term. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Maggie Schover. She's going to walk you through, and Angela Garoni, they're going to walk you through some of the elements of this, and then we'll...
All right, great. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so as Steve mentioned, we're talking about a rate shift that has been going on for a while, but we are seeing, that exacerbated by the proposal that's in front of the board and to be voted on by the TVA board on at their meeting on May 10th. This slide just gives some background that shows how that shift has been taking place. So, showing the trend for shifting TVA's costs off of their large users and onto smaller users. the residential and the small commercial users. So since 2010, residential costs are up nearly 15%, while industrial and customers served directly by TVA are down over 10%. This trend is, clear in the chart shown, and TVA has made this shift, incrementally through changes like the current proposal. So they've kept this shift under the radar as it's been going on. All right, so on the next slide, just a little quick overview about grid access charges in general. They're just bad rate policy. They send perverse market signals. They don't align with industry cost of service best practices, and they reward high users. They're punishing low energy users. Those tend to be low income, those on fixed incomes, minority communities. And in addition to all that, they put up roadblocks, further roadblocks for energy efficiency and distributed generation, such as rooftop solar. So for these reasons, these grid access charges have a negative impact on economic development in the region. So on the next slide, this is a little more detail getting into TVA's proposal. So they have put together this proposal and released an environmental assessment, or EA, earlier this year. TVA's EA is a requirement before TVA can bring a rate structure change to its board for a vote. This EA was misleading about TVA's intent, and it also did not include sufficient analysis to back up TVA's claims of no or minimal socioeconomic and environmental impacts. So over the next few slides, Angela and myself are going to go over, what are the failures in this EA, and where do we go from here? So on the next slide, TVA is using clean energy and energy efficiency as a red herring. So they are misrepresenting the need for change. TVA claims that solar and energy efficiency will drive customer bills up. In reality, TVA made poor investment decisions, as Steve mentioned, investing in large gas and nuclear generation plants that are not needed. And they are now trying to increase their revenues in order to cover those stranded investments. So on the next slide, so getting further into their misrepresentation of the impact of this change on solar, on the distributed solar market. TVA's environmental assessment claims that the rate structure change that they've proposed will have a marginal impact on adoption of distributed solar. This is a direct contradiction to analysis that they presented privately prior to releasing the EA. That analysis showed a decrease in economic installations of 40%. So we hardly think that 40% counts as marginal. And also just want to note that these analyses came to light only through Freedom of Information Act requests, and they were not included in TVA's environmental assessment document. So on the next slide, I will turn it over to Angela to go over some of the additional misrepresentations.
Great. Thanks, Maggie. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm struggling a little bit with my voice, but I'll try to be clear here. So as Maggie said, TVA's draft environmental assessment has a lot of misrepresentations in it. And one of them that's most troubling is how this grid access charge and rate structure change will actually impact lower income customers. As you heard Steve say at the beginning of the webinar, low income customers are generally more impacted by fixed fees because they generally use less energy over the course of the year. So the calculation at the bottom sort of represents that if lower income customers generally use less energy, and fixed fees hurt lower usage customers because it takes away the ability for those customers to control their utility costs through things like energy efficiency or simply behavioral changes. It means that a fixed fee in a rate structure will increase bills for low income customers. In TVA's draft environmental assessment, you'll see at the top, they claim that there actually will be no particular minority or other socioeconomic group that would bear a disproportionate share of the negative effects of this rate structure change. But then TVA actually admits that lower usage customers will see increased utility bills. So TVA is sort of playing with words and labels here to try and distract us from the fact that this is actually going to hurt low-income customers the most. So if you'll see by the next slide, this is troubling because already today, a large amount of TVA's customers are already spending a significant amount of their income on an annual basis to meet energy costs. So that's a metric known as energy burden. So the amount of annual income any household uses to meet energy costs. So this is a map that SACE has created using electrical LPC data in this TVA service territory. And as you can see, the energy burdens range from 4% of a household's annual income to above 20%. And just for some context, the national average of an energy burden is around 3%. So, almost the majority of customers are already paying around the national average, but a significant amount are paying double or more than that for the energy burden. And this change in the rate structure, as TVA says in their draft environmental assessment, could increase low-income customers' burden by as much as 2.8, so almost 3%. And just to put a finer point on this, there are some actual energy burden hotspots in TVA territory. We go to the next slide. One of those, I think we've left it out of this version, but we had a map here for the MLGW service territory. So that will be included in the follow-up email that we're going to send. But I can tell you, I live in Memphis now, and I'm from Memphis, and here we have low-income and minority communities paying an average of 12%, so 4 times the national average, just to keep the lights on, even before TVA does anything like adding a grid access charge. And some of those communities are paying anywhere from 20 to 25%. And in a city like Memphis that has the highest poverty rates in the country already, where half of the children are living below poverty, we are also TVA's largest customer. So for us already to be suffering this much and then to face even more fixed fees and higher bills is really unconscionable and should not be the direction TVA is moving. So we'll get you that map in the follow-up slide, but for this slide that's showing currently on your screen, I'm sorry, Kyle, go back. What we wanted to do, this is once again SACE analysis because it was missing in TVA's draft environmental assessment, its analysis. We wanted to show you where some of the larger local power companies, where their existing monthly fixed fees are already, and where we could see them go if TVA implements sort of the larger, the higher grid access charge at 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So as you can see, for places like Memphis, we have Memphis, Knoxville, Nashville, Chattanooga, and then Jackson, Tennessee represented here. And you can see that each LPC will likely see a large increase in that fixed piece of a customer's bill. Next slide. And so one piece of this, and why maybe many of you have not heard of these fixed fees or seen them, is because there's really a lack of transparency across the board. So not just at TVA, like we've already demonstrated, but also a lot of TVA's local power companies, which are the 154 local utilities that distribute TVA's power to us, the end user. A significant amount of those are not showing these fees on your bill. So what SACE has been doing and will continue to do until we've reviewed all 154 local power company bills, is see which ones are actually showing them on the bill that you receive. So far, we've looked at 63 local power companies, starting with some of the local power companies that serve the largest amount of customers. And so far, only 13 show those on the bill. So we're trending towards likely around 80% of TVA's LPCs do not show these fixed fees on a customer's bill. So just quickly, you can see, for example, MLGW, Chattanooga do not, but Knoxville and Nashville do. So we're going to talk a little more about how you can figure that out and how we can work towards making sure that these are at the very least transparent, and then fighting to actually reduce these and certainly not to increase them. So I wanted to tell you about a map that SACE has created that is actually aimed at helping you figure out how to contact your local power company. And number one, if you're interested in this issue and you want to work locally to make sure that these fixed fees do not continue to increase the burden on customers, especially low-income customers, you can call your local power company and tell them you are against these fixed fees, you're against TVA's plans to increase them. And if they're not already visible on your bill, which you can check by looking at the bill you get on your month, tell them that you want to make these transparent. So we've included the map here, which Kyle, if you could click on it now just so folks can see. This will be included in the follow-up emails so you can access this yourself. And this is going to be a ever-evolving resource. So eventually it will have information about, is the fixed fee transparent? Who are the board members that sit on your local power company board? Things like this. But if we look at just the map here, this is what it'll link you to. Then you click on your local power company. So we'll look at Knoxville's here, and it will pop up and it will tell you, how many customers, residential customers, are served by the utility, what the mandatory fee is, and then you can see there's contact info. So we wanted to be able to provide this, and we'll continue to update it to make it really user-friendly, but this helps you, the residential customer, get in contact with your local power company and share your concerns about this trend, and also find out how much you've been being charged in fixed fees. So if we go back to the slide here, we'll send you at the end of this an email that not only includes the webinar slides, talking points, information about the board meeting, et cetera, but we'll also have a survey that if you do reach out to your local utility, then you can complete that survey. It'll go straight to us. You don't have to email anybody, and we'll know, what did your utility say? And are you interested in, continuing to be informed about this as we learn more and more about what TVA is trying to do behind closed doors. Now, if we go to the, here would be the map that we talked about earlier. So just, as we were talking about with Memphis, here it is. You can see the dark red we were talking about. I mean, this just puts the fine point on those who might want to contact Memphis Light, Gas, and Water about this issue is, these communities, a significant amount are paying, above 7% of their income. And for people with very low incomes like we have here in Memphis who are trying to lift themselves out of poverty, that is certainly no help. So let's go to the next slide, which will help wrap us up here. Steve mentioned at the start of the call that there's an upcoming board meeting, and that will be on May 10th in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. TVA has them across their territory in different spaces, and this month it will be, this coming month it will be in Alabama. And this is likely where the TVA board will vote on whether to approve the rate structure change, which includes this grid access charge. We will, of course, be there and encourage you, if you are in the area, to attend and speak at the public listening session. This is the opportunity to actually speak directly to the TVA board about your concerns. We have a picture here of a volunteer who came with us last time to the Chattanooga board meeting to share her concerns. So if you are going to go, let us know. We'll have contact information, and that way we can be sure to see you there. But the vote will happen, and if it is approved, we will see these rate structure changes as of October 1st, 2018 is when they will be implemented. If you're not able to come to the board meeting, we understand, and one of the things you can help us do, that's pretty painless and quick, is help us continue in our campaign to put public pressure on TVA to fight back against these fixed fees, to let them hear from our customers, their customers about their concerns. So what you can do is join our Thunderclap, which the link to the information will be in the follow-up email. But if you're not familiar with a Thunderclap, what it is it's a tool that helps you schedule either tweets or Facebook posts so that they are all organized and go live at the same time as sort of a thunderclap and a call to action to let TVA know that, we're sounding the alarm on these fixed fees and that the TVA board should reject any rate schemes that increase fixed fees on our bills. So please, if you are busy but have a couple minutes to put your voice in the fight here, we encourage you to join the Thunderclap there. And so with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Amelia to wrap up and get into the Q&A.
All right, thank you, Angela. And as a reminder, if you have a question, click the Q&A tile at the bottom of your screen and you can type your question into us and you can direct it at a particular speaker or we'll help figure out who's the best person to answer it. While folks are thinking, I'll just pose a question to our panelists. It was mentioned earlier in the webinar that fixed fees hurt smaller households, lower energy users, and particularly low-income, minority, elderly communities or households. Can you say a little bit more about that and what the connection is between fixed fee impacts and energy burden and those demographic pieces of who is most impacted?
Sure. Yeah, this is Angela. I can take that. So essentially what a fixed fee does is it removes a cost or a piece of your bill that would normally be associated with your actual use, so your actual energy use. What is known in the nerdier energy policy groups as a volumetric charge, so the one that tracks your usage. It removes a piece of that and puts it onto a fixed rate. So it's a fixed charge. If you use very little energy before you even flip on a switch, you're going to have this flat charge that's part of now your electric bill. Some of us, I'll say it's a little confusing. Some of us, for example, those of us in Memphis think of a fixed fee or mandatory fee as the city fees that are actually included on our utility bill. So some local power companies have been tasked with collecting things like sewage costs, vector control costs on the utility bill. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about your actual electric bill. And pieces of that will now be taken away from your control, and a percentage of that will be just flat fee. So customers who use a huge amount of energy, your industry, your large homes, those people will have the same charge as people who use less amounts, who have smaller homes, who do things like keep the thermostats, high in the summer and low in the winter, who have invested in energy efficient technologies to try and reduce their costs. These benefits will basically be eroded just because TVA basically has, overinvested and doesn't want to be left with stranded costs. So for folks who have a fixed income, who have older homes, these are the ones who already have high energy burdens, and they will lose the ability to control costs. That's really the issue here. Places like Memphis, like I said, we're majority minority, we're already high poverty. We're just going to continue to sort of be crunched here, and people are going to continue to scramble to meet costs and decide, do I meet healthcare costs this month or do I keep my lights on? So that's really what we're talking about here is the real danger. I hope that was responsive.
Great, thank you, Angela. Our next question comes from Nashville. Some of us met with Nashville Electric Service Board a few weeks ago. They indicated they were against the TVA rate structure proposal. Do you know if they expressed this? Have other local power companies taken a stance against the rate structure change? Steve, will you take that one?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And the answer is complicated. There are some of the local power companies who have encouraged their customers to speak out against this. There are others who have quietly tried to discourage TVA from moving forward with this. And then there are a few of the local power companies that have sort of bought into this. So you can imagine with 154 different local power companies, there are a diversity of opinions. But let me state this. None of the local power companies, none of the ones that we've seen have just come out and embraced this. Indeed, TVA has initially proposed a 1 cent grid access fee, and the local power companies in the Rates and Contract Committee told TVA that all they wanted to do was a 0.5 cent, which is still problematic. And there were discussions going on about whether, in return for allowing the grid access fee to go forward, would there be some contract flexibility for the local power companies to be able to work with customers and do some more innovative things. And TVA has largely shut that down. TVA has not been that interested in really moving forward on true contract flexibility. So let me explain that. With the 154 local power companies, they have 100% all requirement contracts, meaning they have to buy all of their power from TVA and they can't get it from anywhere else, and they can't generate their own power. This is a very directive and prescriptive contract that gives the local power companies very limited flexibility. And for a long time, the local power companies have wanted more flexibility, but this grid access fee in many ways further limits that, because what TVA is ultimately doing here is they're shifting the risk off of TVA as a corporation onto the local power companies writ large. As power sales continue to decline, TVA is putting more of that pressure and risk on the local power companies and less on TVA itself. So this is why this is a very sort of insidious and devious plan that TVA has hatched. NES National Electric Service was certainly part of the conversations. We have seen that their general manager or CEO, DeCosta Jenkins, was very involved in trying to get greater contract flexibility. But ultimately what happened was TVA told the local power companies that they effectively had to take the grid access fee, or TVA would just force it on them, because TVA has the regulatory authority over these local power companies, and therefore it can force the local power companies to take it. And they told the local power companies effectively, if you don't agree to this and you publicly oppose it, we're going to go higher than you want us to on the grid access fee. We're going to give you even less flexibility in how you're able to translate it from the wholesale to the retail, and we're going to force it on you anyway. And so the local power companies seem to be acquiescing to this, at least in their public happiness. So this is a real problem, but it shows the fact that TVA has no accountability, and the way that their rate design is set up, they can roll over the local power companies and force their hand. And so there is some unhappiness. The question is how much of that is going to be actually made public and how much of it is just happening behind the scenes. So let me stop there. I know it's a little bit long-winded, but hopefully that's helpful.
Thanks, Steve. Our next question is, what is the preferred alternative rate structure to facilitate TVA's transition to a renewable energy future? Maggie, would you take this one?
Yep. All right. Thanks, Don, for the question. So, I mean, I think the first answer is that we didn't see anything wrong with the current structure at this point in time. It's not sending perverse market signals the way that the proposal is for high fixed fees. But we also see promise in moving in the future to more of a time of use rate. So that would be maybe an optional rate structure for folks that have solar, for folks that have EVs as well, so that they are charging their electric vehicles at times when it makes sense on the grid, and they're being compensated for their solar generation for the value that generation is providing to the grid itself. So we're seeing a few examples across the country of where these time of use rates are an option for folks when they have systems like solar or like EVs. So.
Great, thank you, Maggie. Our next question is, how will the increase in fixed fees affect the wholesale rate? Will that rate go down or be flat? Steve, would you like to take this one?
So what TVA is proposing is they're proposing shifting their original proposal was the 1 cent off of the energy charge and moving it to the fixed charge. This is about $1.2 billion in the overall TVA system, moving from the energy charge over to the fixed charge and then spread across all the different rate designs with the local power companies. So what that does is, and this is where it really begins to hurt the economics behind things like energy efficiency and solar, because their attempt is to try to lower that variable rate as a way to disincentivize. And then the way they're going to continue to design this is they're going to, this rewards, and through things like declining block rates and others, this will reward customers who use a larger amount of energy. And that's what I said earlier on, is your people who live in, 5, 6, 7,000 square feet houses and are large energy users will benefit more than, say, the majority of the TVA customers, which are on the lower end of the scale and don't use as much power. So it's a real problem. Up over time, the amount that they're shifting onto the fixed fee. And I'll go ahead and pick up Brian's question here too, because it's sort of consistent with that. The question about is the 1.5 cent, is the 1 cent number where it's going to stay? So remember, TVA initially proposed 1 cent change, but then they demonstrated they wanted to go up to 2.5 cents over the next few years. So this is just the opening salvo of a trend that TVA wants to keep dialing up these fixed rates over the next few years. The local power companies said all we would agree to is 0.5 cent. And so that is likely what will pass on May 10th. The TVA board is going to force this through at 0.5 cent. But there is an understanding that over time they will be dialing this up. So what TVA wants to do is add 2.5 cents in the next approximately 4 to 5 years in order to move the fixed fees up at the wholesale level. How that is translated from wholesale to retail is still a work in progress, and those terms are still being negotiated. But we expect that a number of the local power companies are going to pass this charge on through as added fixed fees, and that's where it's really a big problem. So let me stop there. I think hopefully I answered Brian Paddock's question also about the 2.5 cents. But we don't know. There's some difference of opinion about whether TVA would have to go through a similar rate change in the future, or would they be allowed just to move it forward with even less oversight and communication going forward. We think, unfortunately, that they're going to be able to do it with even less engagement as they move from the original change on May 10th up to the higher fees over time. I'll stop there.
Our next question comes from Memphis. Is it time to start dismantling TVA by using local control over MLGW, that's Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, to cancel the TVA contract? Angela, will you help us out with that one?
Yeah, and let me ask Kyle, can you go back to the maps just so we know what we're talking about with TVA service territory here? Keep going. The energy burden map, I think, is the best visual, just so folks can see the service territory. So Memphis, of course, far left corner here. I just want to speak here a little bit in theoreticals, because I think each local power company and their contract with TVA obviously is different, but just for background so folks understand, if you're not familiar with how this works, TVA enters into this wholesale contract we referred to with local power companies, and that contract requires the local power company to buy 100% of their power needs, electric needs, from TVA. So these are contracts like any legal contract, which means they are binding, but of course there are always ways to get out of contracts. So depending on which contract we're talking about, there's a term in there that allows an LPC to give TVA notice a certain amount of time. It could be 5 years, could be 10 years notice to exit the contract and search elsewhere for power electric supply needs. LPCs have done this in the past. A lot of the ones up here, they're in Kentucky that are on the edge. Some of them did that a few years ago and they were upset with a rate change that TVA enacted. I just wanted to say, practically speaking, looking at the map, TVA has a lot of insular LPCs they serve, right? So like Nashville, they're in the middle. If they wanted to exit a contract, they'd have to get power from another source, and they'd have to what is called wheel that power through TVA's transmission system. And TVA can choose whether or not to allow power to be wheeled from outside. So practically speaking, it's pretty difficult for those inside LPCs to really get out from underneath TVA. Memphis or the LPCs on the edge, like in Kentucky or over in East Tennessee, you can see the edges. Those theoretically have a better option for them, for themselves, because they are on the edge, which means there would not be as much need for TVA to be part of the wheeling or anything like that. So that's why folks likely in Memphis have heard this before in local conversations, this idea of leaving TVA. But, I don't want to speak to what that could mean economically, because obviously we've seen other places in our region in the Southeast that have been negatively affected by investor-owned utilities, so which are the sort of opposite of TVA's public power entity utilities. So I will say that I think it is very much something that we support in terms of opening up an LPC contract, such that an LPC could generate some of their energy through solar or wind and not have to buy 100% of their electrical needs from TVA. So there's a lot in that question, but I wanted to just sort of give some background for those who aren't as familiar with how these contractual agreements are set up. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Angela.
Hey,
So
Amelia,
yeah.
Amelia, this is Steve. I just wanted to add a little bit more to Angela's answer, just real quick.
Sure.
There are currently 154 local power companies. There was a time when there was 158. And so local power companies have left the TVA system. It is not unheard of, and we've seen migrations in the past off of the TVA system. And this is one of the things that I think TVA is playing a very dangerous game as they antagonize their customers and they begin to inflame people in the valley. There's no guarantee that these local power companies have to stay with TVA, and if they get fed up, they can terminate their contracts, and it can start in essence what is a death spiral to some degree for sort of TVA as how we know it. And so I think that if TVA continues to be very heavy-handed and not really embrace the changes that are coming in the industry, they use these all requirements contracts in heavy-handed ways to try to limit local power companies' choice. They continue to raise base rates on customers. They continue to shift more cost onto the residential and the small businesses off of the big industrial customers. I think they really run the risk of creating a backlash. And so while we don't anticipate that there's going to be anything in the coming few months, I think that there is a heightened degree of frustration with the way that Bill Johnson and the executive team is leading TVA right now. And again, some of this stuff has bubbled onto the surface. It's really unfortunate that TVA continues to be as heavy-handed as they have been.
So as we're approaching the top of the hour, that actually brings up a really good point that we haven't addressed yet on this webinar, that TVA has increasingly come under fire for its purchase and now its use of luxury aircraft. And I wanted to ask you, Steve, to say a little bit more about the latest on that since our last webinar, which is before the February TVA board meeting, and use that to wrap up this webinar.
Yeah, so we, as many of you know, we highlighted and put a spotlight on the fact that under Bill Johnson's leadership, he's the current CEO of TVA, we've seen just a complete attitudinal shift in sort of the way that TVA looks at itself. Instead of being a partner and being focused on helping residential customers and small businesses, TVA has begun to shift more and more to act like basically a large private investor-owned utility. This is the mindset that Bill Johnson has brought in, and they've begun to do these rate shifts that we've talked about, where they're giving 20% or more decreases to the largest manufacturing customers, and through a series of things, even more that they're going to do on May 10th, because they're going to continue to shift cost off of these large industrial customers. But a further example and systematic way that TVA is going about this is Bill Johnson decided that, you know something, having a single airplane that TVA's used for decades to get around, they've decided bought a jet, then they bought a really fancy luxury, literally Mercedes-Benz style helicopter with hardwood floors. They claimed they had to have it for economic development, which is kind of a joke. And then in 2017, one jet wasn't enough. They bought a second jet. And we put a spotlight on that. And then unbeknownst to us, TVA's Inspector General has also been investigating this. They did a fairly limited scope investigation of the purchase of the first jet and a second King Air, which is a turboprop type of airplane, similar to what TVA had before. And they found all types of improprieties and lack of accurate record keeping, lack of really good justification for using these, lack of justification for the actual purchase themselves, showing that the jets really don't bring any added benefit because by the time you take off in Knoxville in one of those jets, you can't even get to altitude before if you go to Chattanooga, which only saves you a few minutes. And then the vast majority of TVA's flights are well under the 600-mile trip that would actually allow the jet to be more cost effective or even faster and very significantly faster than the King Air and this, that, and the other. But more problematic was we also began to see that Bill Johnson has been using the TVA corporate aircraft to fly to his second home in Raleigh, North Carolina, where his wife still lives. She never moved over when he took the position at TVA. And we've now documented 31 flights where the TVA jets and other aircraft were in Raleigh-Durham over Johnson's tenure. And then we've also documented over 76 flights where Richard Holworth, who is the board chairman in Oxford, Mississippi. Now, TVA is justified going to Oxford some because it's in the service territory, yes. And yes, it is appropriate. Maybe I'm a real frequent flyer using these corporate jets, even though he told the newspaper that he would normally drive to Memphis and catch the ride when they flew the jets over there to pick up other board members. That clearly wasn't the truth. So this is, again, systematic of a mindset at TVA where, they're jetting around literally over the people that they're servicing, and they've kind of lost touch with TVA's roots of being an agency and an entity that was really built to help lift the people in the Tennessee Valley. And this is all part and parcel for Bill Johnson's mindset. So let me stop there. I know there may be a few other questions. We can try to maybe directly answer those through text to the folks that have asked them. But Amelia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, I think we have just a couple minutes left, so I'll ask one more that's come in. Can someone please mention the amount of debt that TVA has and they're trying to shift to MLGW? Again, that's the Memphis Utility Local Power Company.
Well, the debt that TVA has is, it's a little fuzzy right now because TVA has been raising rates on residential and small commercial in order to pay down some of the debt, and they haven't been transparent on exactly where they are. But the debt is somewhere between roughly $21 billion, that's billion with a B, and about $24 billion dollars. This is largely made up of historic decision-making, a lot of it in the nuclear power side of the program that TVA had with. And I am unaware that they're necessarily trying to shift the burden onto any particular local power company. The whole grid access fee is an effort to be able to collect revenue, even though power sales are declining for the company. And so to some degree, the whole grid access fee is a shift to try to be able to continue to collect money instead of further cutting costs and redoing the way they do the rate structures to do it in a more economically efficient fashion. But the debt is large. It is a problem for TVA, and they continue to struggle with that.
All right, thank you, Steve, and thank you to all our presenters today. And of course, thank you everybody for joining us and for your thoughtful questions. Our presentation today has been recorded, and we will send you a link to that recording once it's been processed, along with links to our actions. So again, we're asking folks to do two things following this call. One, if you are a Twitter user, sign up for our Thunderclap so we can rise above the noise on social media on the morning of the board meeting on May 10th. And the link to sign up so that your Twitter account will automatically text about TVA that morning is in the chat window here. We're also going to include in our follow-up email directions and information to help you call your local power company and tell them to stop fixed fees there and at TVA. It will have that link to the interactive map so you can find out how your fixed fee has changed and get the name of the general manager for when you make that call, along with a survey link so you can tell us what you learned from your call and we know that the call was made. So thank you again in advance for taking action. We look forward to hearing from you how it goes. And finally, if you enjoyed today's presentation, consider joining SACE as a member so that we can continue to work towards clean energy solutions for the Southeast. You can do that at cleanenergy.org for information on how to join and become involved. Take care, everyone, and have a great week. Bye.